Hi, this is Alydia Rackham, and welcome to this week's novel writing tutorial. So today we're actually going to be talking about short stories, because I know that a lot of people enjoy writing those too, and they can be really good exercise. So I'm going to tell you how it's similar, developing a short story, and how it's different from writing a novel. Okay, so the similarities are you still have to have an arc. You still have to, have the introduction and then the rising action, and then the climax and then the falling action. So you'll have to construct it that way. You will need an outline of some sort. It's not necessarily very long, but you will need an outline. You will need a solid setting. You need to know exactly where you are, when you are, and what clothes everybody's wearing, what state they're in, socially, economically, everything like that. You will need to have that precise. And there's a very important reason for that I'll get to later. You need to have solid, well thought out characters still. And you will need, if you have a villain, he or she will need to be just as well thought out as your protagonist. Same as in the novel. Your conflict or problem will need to be very well developed and thought out by you. It can't be vague, it can't be distant. You have to know what it is, what's going on, and how it affects your characters. Alright, so the differences are, obviously you have to have a much sharper arc. It's more like, it goes like this. Pooh! It's just like that. It's not this nice woo like in a novel. It's So, and actually it's more like straight down. There's usually not a ton of falling action in a short story. And when I say short story, I'm talking about at the longest 3-4 chapters. Sometimes it's just 1 chapter length. But if you start getting into 6, 7, 8 chapters long, then we're start talking about a novella, and you just use the same stuff that you would use as a novel. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something really short here. Necessarily, because the arc looks like this, there's a lot less development. You can't spend all this time developing the setting, developing the characters, because it's a short story. Your characters have to be well developed, but you don't have to know them as well. So if you're doing a short story, you don't need to ask them no 100 questions. Just stick with maybe 30. Because you're not spending that much time with them. You're not going to get to see them in all these varieties of different situations. You're maybe going to see them in 2 situations or 3. Maybe. So you're just going to need to know how they'll react in this particular situation. Not all kinds. You just simply won't go there. So don't spend the time doing that. Just have him or her answer 30 questions. And that's probably good enough. If you've ever studied poetry, and I hope you do if you haven't, what you really learn about poetry is it's the best way to say something in the shortest amount of space. So Shakespeare's sonnets are very much like that. They portray deep ideas, deep, expansive ideas in just a few lines. So in a short story, that's kind of how you are wanting to be thinking. You want to think like a poet. You don't want to think like a novelist or an epic writer. You don't have time. You don't have space. Think of yourself as, okay, how can I make this succinct and as clear as possible? This is where it's extremely important to describe through action. So instead of describing the street first and then the guy walking through it, you describe the street as he's walking through it. See what I mean? There's a difference there. And see, if you did it the first way, you took 2 times as much room and space and time. Is if you could just put him in the foggy London street and describe it as he's moving. Efficiency. Also in a shorter story is where you can break the rules about describing people. If you don't have time, about the showing, don't telling. Showing, don't tell. Show, don't tell. If you don't have a lot of room or space, you just cut to the chase and you tell the reader what they need to know. If you're going to do that, then you need to adopt a sort of conversational style, so that it feels like you as a storyteller are actually sitting there by the fireplace telling this to one of your friends. And that makes an excuse for, because it feels like you're talking about somebody that you know. Oh gosh, let me tell you about this person. Rather than this distant narrator who just feels like laying down facts in front of your face. It's like a conversation between friends. So here's a really good example of this. Everybody's heard of Charles Dickens and his masterwork, A Christmas Carol, right? Lots of people don't know that he wrote lots of Christmas stories. As a matter of fact, he wrote this many. Yeah, he became Mr. Christmas. Before Bing Crosby was Mr. Christmas, Charles Dickens was Mr. Christmas. So here's what he wrote in, it was a collection of his Christmas stories, the author's preface here. He says, "The narrow space within which it was necessary to confine these Christmas stories, when they were originally published, rendered their construction a matter of some difficulty, and almost necessitated what is peculiar in their machinery. I never attempted great elaboration of detail in the working out of character within such limits, believing that it could not succeed. My purpose was, in a whimsical kind of mask, which the good humour of the season justified, to awaken some loving and forbearing thoughts, never out of season in a Christian land." So, there's his excuse. It's like, I'm not going to spend all this time like I do in my other novels, like Oliver Twist and The Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby and Great Expectations, which was like huge. Mostly because he had a deadline, okay? He wrote all the other things serially, so it was in his best interest to make things as long as possible, because then he had everybody hooked. It's like a TV show. And they came out in the magazine, and so they're like, oh, what's next? And if he finished a story, then he risked the next one not being liked by everybody. So the longer he could stretch them out, the better. But with the Christmas stories, they had to be done, and they had to be published, and they had to be out for people to enjoy during the holiday season. So he's like, I can't spend thousands of pages getting to know Scrooge. And so here's what he did. Instead of taking the whole novel to describe Scrooge, and instead of having other people describe him, and which you could easily do if it was longer, he decides to tell you about Scrooge. And as a result, produces some of the best writing that has ever been, and it's very poetic. So I'm going to read it to you, and here's how he did this. "Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, and made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he, no falling snow was more intent upon its purpose, no pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, with gladsome looks, 'My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?' No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, 'No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master.' But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, wanting all human sympathy to keep its distance. What the knowing ones call nuts to Scrooge. See, so that's how you do that. If you don't have a lot of time, but you have this person in your mind, then make it really fun to read. Don't just tell us. Because you're already telling, so don't belabor us with just facts about the color of their hair or whatever. You have to really personify every detail to make it just as engaging as that, if you can. There's also a myth going around that you need to write a whole bunch of short stories before you write a novel. Sorry, they're different breeds. It's like saying, well, you need to own a cat before you own a dog. No, different. So different. I mean, it's nice to, they're both animals, but no, that's baloney. And actually, people who just zip out short stories all the time might have great difficulty writing a novel because they feel like there's no end in sight. Well, it's like, it is the same thing, the race thing again. It's like running a sprint versus running a marathon. No, you don't train for a marathon by running sprints. So you can use short stories for ideas that you have that are just short. Don't try to take a novel-length concept and scrunch it into a short story. Same thing. Don't try to take a short story concept and stretch it into a novel. They both have to be developed in very different ways. Short stories are fun. They're good ways to explore little things. And you can also write a series of short stories about the same character, just like Arthur Conan Doyle did with Sherlock Holmes. And because he did that, he really created episodes within a very long story. So you can do that. But he's an excellent one to learn from. If you want to learn how to make a good short story, go and read some of the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. You can read one in an evening. They're very short, they're very fun, they're fast-paced, they keep you guessing. Perfect example of how to describe things and people and how to endear a reader to your characters right away. So that's your homework. Go read at least one of Arthur Conan Doyle's The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. At least one. I dare you to only stop at one because it's like eating one potato chip. You're going to want to read more. Alright, next time we're going to talk about who you should let read your stuff at various stages. Meaning even essays, short stories, poetry, and novels. Who should you let handle this? Because everybody thinks they have preconceptions about who they should give this to, and a lot of times they're not right. And I've learned that from experience for myself and other people. So I can't wait to talk to you about that. See you next week.